Welcome to the Femsplainers. I'm Danielle Crittenden, and I'm speaking to you from up north, Canada, where I have fled just for the summer. But joining me on this episode is one of our favorite co-splainers, Caitlin Flanagan. Welcome, Caitlin. You have not fled. You are still in your is it your bedroom in California, in Los Angeles?
Must you shame me? I will admit that all podcasts or news appearances or anything that I've done since the pandemic have been me trying to find a different angle in my bedroom so that it would seem as though I was in 100 different fabulous spaces, and yet I'm in my bedroom, which is quite small now that I have a desk in it.
Well, at least I think it looks like your bed is made today, so.
I did that. I did that. That was just a little, I don't know, je ne sais quoi that added to the experience of me in my bedroom.
Well, I'm a little nervous about today's topic, and I'm if anything happens to us, if this show gets canceled or whatever, I'm going to blame you because you brought up this book, and it is an amazing book. It's by Abigail Shrier. It's called Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. And it's so important, but yet even to discuss its contents could get us in huge trouble.
Yeah, when I very first heard an inkling about a book about young trans girl to boy trans kids that was called Irreversible Damage, I thought, oh, I'm not going to like this. This is just a hyper-conservative book. But of course, when I read it, I found that Abigail Shrier has deeply researched issues around the phenomenon of teen girls, high school girls, even middle school girls who announce that they're trans. And she's really followed the whole process that immediately can begin from that. And it's made me realize that, I've never spoken about any doubts I have about the whole kind of philosophical ideology underpinning that aspect of the trans movement, because I used to think it was because I was so valorous and such a supporter of trans people, which I am. But when it came to the girls, after reading this book, I thought, maybe I'm not celebrating my own virtue. Maybe I'm trying to hide my own cowardice. Because the only way this is what she has in this book is information that LGBT supporting parents, the most progressive kind of parents, are eager for. Just some information about the process. Your daughter says she's a boy, you support her, you go to the pediatrician, and what happens from there? And is this the appropriate kind of care for a girl? And I thought, I was a school teacher during the 90s when it was all about empowering the girl. It was such an exciting time to be a teacher and making sure that they were performing as well in math and science as the boys. And in the beginning of the 90s, girls were still like 20% fewer admissions to Princeton. It was very lopsided, were granted to girls. So it was a very different world. And through empowering girlhood, a real revolution happened. And so I think I was kind of wondering, am I standing up for girls and their physical and moral and emotional development by not reading and talking about this book?
And this phenomenon that she describes. One of the things that you spoke about, the politics of it, and I think, I don't think I'll say this to Abigail when she comes on, but one of my disappointments with the book is nothing that is contained within it, but that it's come out by what is seen as a very conservative press, Regnery Books. The blurbs are from people like, well, not all, but Dennis Prager, Ben Shapiro. There's also a wonderful quote from blurb from Ayaan Hirsi Ali. But it's I don't know, it's like face masks. This is an issue that should not be politicized. It's about girls' mental health. It's about their physical health and what is happening. And yet, as we'll hear from Abigail, what these young women, as early as 11 and 12 are going through and being encouraged to do by the professionals around them, doctors, teachers, counselors. It's interesting, J.K. Rowling, as you know, has been in a lot of trouble because she didn't come out as anti-trans. And again, this is what's so frustrating in this argument. But she wanted to stand up for women and what is sort of becoming an assault on womanhood in terms of having safe spaces for women, and including talking about this phenomenon. She read a statement which now everybody who like the stars of her movies have denounced, her whole fan clubs are denouncing, but in part she wrote, and I have it right here in front of me, one of the reasons she wanted to speak out on this message was that she was, quote, concerned about the huge explosion in young women wishing to transition, and also about the increasing numbers who seem to be detransitioning or returning to their original sex because they regret taking steps that have, in some cases, altered their bodies irrevocably and taken away their fertility. Some say they decided to transition after realizing they were same-sex attracted, and that transitioning was partly driven by homophobia, either in societies or in their families. And then she goes on to say, most people probably aren't aware, and I certainly wasn't until I started researching this issue, that 10 years ago, the majority of people wanting to transition to the opposite sex were male. That ratio is now reversed. The UK has experienced a 4,400% increase in girls being referred for transitioning treatment. And she notes that autistic girls are hugely overrepresented in their numbers. So we'll talk to Abigail about why that's also happening here. And I hope that people listening to this will understand exactly what we're talking about, and that it's without any malice towards anybody or who wants to be trans. But and I also, if I may, Caitlin, thank our patrons at Patreon and Glow for supporting us, because if you feel these conversations are important, you are how we will survive. So we get into any hot water for this. We count on you, and we thank you for supporting us. And after Abigail, we also have some fun listener reaction, which has nothing to do with any of this, that we can bring on. So
I did want to say one thing about J.K. Rowling. It's a difficult thing with her, because on the one hand, what a powerful platform, as we say nowadays, she has for this. And whenever there's a huge public backlash to an idea, there's always a quietly, thank goodness we have this information, that people often vote in ways different from the way they tell pollsters they're just going to vote, etc. The one shortcoming of this book and of our conversation in general on this topic in the world is that we don't have a space or a way for supporting the kids who are genuinely trans, who genuinely need the support to be brought through a transitioning process and to find the right time, and is this the right time, and so forth. There's no support for that. And I don't know what the answer to that is, because we're not saying at all that transgenderism is not existent in the world, but we're also saying that this vulnerable time of girlhood is a time when a lot of deep emotions about the self and about the body can often come up, certainly in our culture. And we have to be very sensitive to that. So,
exactly.
And about J.K. Rowling, she has the platform, so maybe she's the best person. On the other hand, I have a bit of reticence in that she is someone that so many kids around the world have held so tenderly. The books are such tender experiences for them, and to feel suddenly to be turned against in their perception by the author is probably harsh. So, it's a tough one for her. But she's planted her flag. So
no, she's been brave. Like Martina Navratilova, the tennis player, came out against having male sex players in women's leagues, and she lost her sponsorships, but she's maintained it. That she saw this as the destruction at some level of the future of women's sports. So anyway, I wish we could just at least talk about it in a civilized way. But, we'll see. Anyway, also, this is part of we're kicking off our 6-week summer author series. And so Abigail's first up. And we'll bring on Abigail after this short message from one of our sponsors. With businesses moving many of their operations off-site and having to make tough decisions about their employees, why not consider using Bambi for your HR and save money? Because when running a business, HR issues can kill you. Wrongful termination suits, minimum wage requirements, labor regulations, and HR manager salaries aren't cheap, an average of $70,000 a year. Bambi, spelled B-A-M-B-E-E, was created specifically for small business. You can get a dedicated HR manager, craft HR policy, and maintain your compliance all for just $99 a month. With Bambi, you can change HR from your biggest liability to your biggest strength. Your dedicated HR manager is available by phone, email, or real-time chat. From onboarding to terminations, they customize your policy to fit your business and help you manage your employees day to day, all for $99 a month. Month to month, no hidden fees. You can cancel at any time. You didn't start your business because you wanted to spend time on HR compliance. Let Bambi help and get your free HR audit today. So go to Bambi.com/fem right now to schedule your free HR audit. That's Bambi.com/fem, spelled B-A-M to the BEE.com/fem. Welcome, Abigail, to the Femsplainers.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me on.
Well, we're a little nervous because your book has barely been published and there's already great controversy surrounding it.
Yes, Amazon has refused to allow sponsored ads for my book. So if you do a search, if you enter search terms on Amazon looking for my book, you will find sponsored products, some of which are books promoting and encouraging girls to medically transition to the opposite sex, or at least looking like the opposite sex. But if you try to publish a book like mine, which is skeptical that that's a very good idea, apparently that's enough to get you blocked from sponsored ads.
Well, before we get into all the controversy, let's talk about, and let's be very clear, I think we need a disclaimer up the top of this interview because it's so easy to have everything taken out of context and the important things that you are saying taken out of context. So let's clarify who and what we're talking about and who we're not talking about.
So the book is about a sudden spike in transgender identification among teenage girls. These are girls who claim to have gender dysphoria, which is the severe discomfort in one's biological sex. That's the sort of psychological underpinning to the transgender identification, which is sort of the social designation. But what's interesting is these girls what they have does not look like typical gender dysphoria at all. So it really has no bearing on the, individuals who are afflicted with genuine gender dysphoria. And are now many of whom are now transgender adults leading good lives. And I interviewed them for my book as well. This is a separate phenomenon. It's a pure contagion that seems to be spreading through teenage girls in friend groups.
How big is this phenomenon? Like, what are we talking about? Because you say this isn't actually people with sort of, can we say genuine gender dysphoria, or the percentage of the population? You've noticed this as a real trend among adolescent girls.
Right. It's enormous. So it's throughout the West, Canada, Scandinavia, the US, and the UK. And in the UK, they know that it's up over 4,000% among adolescent girls. In the US, we know that it's way up. We know that 2% of high school students, for instance, now identify as transgender, whereas it used to be 0.01% of the population. So 1/100th of a percent of the population. It's a massive increase. The reason we don't know what the percentage is precisely for girls that has risen in the US is because you no longer need even a diagnosis of gender dysphoria in order to get the hormone therapy. So a lot of girls are just getting it without even any diagnosis.
Wow, that's incredible. And I just wanted to underline what you just said previously. You know, Amazon, of course, is the largest distributor of books in the world, in the world. And Jeff Bezos is on track to potentially be the first trillionaire in history.
Wow.
And Amazon is censoring speech. It is censoring a book deeply reported by a former Wall Street Journal staff writer, now a frequent contributor, that they will not take those sponsored ads when it's the biggest book distributor in the world. That shows you the state that we're living in, what the state is doing to us. So I think that is unbelievable. And the next question I wanted to ask, I suddenly became aware of all this with the Brown study, and I never knew what happened to that study, but you unpacked it and it was shocking. Can you share about that?
Sure. So Lisa Littman is the researcher, a public health researcher, and I interviewed her many times. And she noticed while she was, she was at Brown University, and she was scrolling through her social media feed, and she noticed that a huge number of girls, many more than one would, the prevalence data she would have expected, were coming out as transgender just in her social media feed, and that they seemed to be clustered in friend groups. And that really surprised her. This is an ailment. We have 100-year diagnostic history of gender dysphoria at this point. So we know what it looks like. We know what real gender dysphoria is. And it's always afflicted males overwhelmingly. There were some females, but it was overwhelmingly male. And it starts most often in early childhood, ages 2 to 4. Little boys who insist they're not boys, they're girls. They don't want to be a boy. They don't want to play with boys. They don't want to play with boy things, that sort of thing. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the predominant demographic now all across the West is teenage girls with no childhood history of gender dysphoria. So she knew it didn't look like normal gender dysphoria. And she also knew that this demographic was special in this way. And that is, it was susceptible to all kinds of hysterias or peer contagions. So this is the same demographic that experiences anorexia, bulimia, cutting, and so forth. And she hypothesized that this might be one more peer contagion.
Well, it's something, as you've written, that has just suddenly happened. That suddenly it is like a contagion, as you call it, and it's something that, as you reported, it thrives in imitation in your peer group. That if somebody does it, you're much more likely to do it than if not. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. I mean, she found that, in friend groups, it's over 70 times the expected prevalence rate. That's even if you accounting for the fact that you might say, oh, kids might be more comfortable coming out as transgender today. The social stigmas have fallen away. Even given that, it's a surprising number. It's very high. And we're seeing this across the West. Yeah.
And what you said, which was so fascinating, I just noted this down. You sort of hinted it at the beginning. It said, the transitioning, this whole idea to transition to a boy, is not necessarily related to sex or sexual preference. It's not, in some cases it might be because you have nascent feelings as a lesbian, but it's sort of now being channeled that way. But it's not even a medical diagnosis. You said it's a social identity that they are taking on. And there is really no more, there's nothing more to being transgendered by this definition than just saying, I'm a boy.
Right. So it's not even necessarily about gender, is the funny thing. These girls are in distress. We know that. We've seen that. Jonathan Haidt has written on this. These girls are in the midst of the worst mental health crisis we've ever seen among teenage girls, with very high rates of anxiety, depression, and they, people who study this link this to the emergence of the iPhone and social media for these girls. It causes them a severe amount of distress. So these are girls that are very, very, they're definitely in very real pain, and they sort of look to the culture as people in psychological distress do, to be able to self-diagnose. What is the pain that I'm feeling? And because there's so much awareness and prevalence of the transgender identity in the culture, they're looking to gender dysphoria to explain the pain they feel. And of course, there's also all the influencers on social media.
What about the parents Is there a typical parental response when they hear about this, or who are these parents of these girls?
So these are white middle class and upper middle class girls by and large. The parents are very educated. They're very supportive. They're Gen X parents, and they're politically progressive overwhelmingly. And I think the reason is because they have a certain open-mindedness to it, which is not a bad thing. When they're first presented with it, rather than saying, when a child says to them, I think I might be a boy, or they often start out with, I think I might be a lesbian, the parent doesn't say, no, you're not, or you're only 12, or that's terrible, or anything like that. They embrace the child. They say, that's wonderful. That's totally fine with me. I love you anyway, all the stuff. And sometimes what the young teen was looking for was not exactly support for her genuine sexual identity. In some cases, the child was just asking for rebellion. She was really asking for a space to separate from mom and dad. And when she doesn't get that, sometimes then she turns to the transgender identity, because that gets mom's attention.
Well, it also gets cultural attention, right? You talked about these influencers. Like, just tell us a little bit about how it's the thing. If you're having these questions and maybe you're wondering if this is what I should do, what happens to that young girl?
So this was a part that really disturbed me when I interviewed teens who have gone through this. There's so much celebration of these identities on social media. And so they're on, Reddit or Tumblr or whatever it is, TikTok. And, a lonely, anxious teen, girl of 12, 13, 14 will decide that she might be transgender too. And there's a lot of encouragement for this online. And if she selects a transgender identity, and I've heard this from adolescents, they will get flooded with congratulations and support, and you're so brave, and all what they call a love bombing in a sense, by all sorts of strangers. Some of them, many of them adults, and some of them up to no good. And it escalates sometimes from there.
It's confusing because one of the most wonderful things about our era, something in high school I never thought I'd see, is gay kids being accepted from such an early age, and kids having such an understanding that being gay or being bisexual, that these are things that don't hold you back socially, that are, the kid who was, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, have been really taunted by if she came out as lesbian or a boy came out as gay. There's this wonderful
especially
acceptance.
In these communities, right, Caitlin, that Abigail's talking about.
I guess I've always lived in those communities.
Yeah,
yes, you're right.
It's the woke, not woke parents, but the accepting, affluent parents who are, in many cases, liberal or left. And this is exactly what you say. Some would be even overjoyed to find out that their children are gay.
So I just want to make the point that we want to obviously affirm and accept these gay kids 100%, and we'll get to in a second what do we do for girls who truly are trans. But there's just this sense that something has whipped through the culture that I used to think of as benign. Like I would see these girls and I would just say, good for them. I was a kid in the 60s and 70s, your identity, you're creating it. It's all about this. And as a former teacher, I would always say to parents, listen, if you want, not gender issues, but just if you want to fight with your kid for 3 months about how his hair is cut and what he's wearing, you go ahead. But you might as well teach him about something about history or religion, because at least that would be worthwhile. So reading your book made me realize that I myself had bought into a way of response that was irresponsible as a community member. Can you kind of walk us through the things that happen to a girl when she has affirming parents and she gets affirming care at her pediatrician and affirming care everywhere she goes? What happens?
Sure. So it tends to solidify So the identity in the child's mind, in the young teen's mind. So one thing to know about today's Gen Z, so the generation born starting in the year 2000, is that they're awfully young. They're very, very emotionally young. They have been really tended by helicopter and snowplow parents, right? And they're very good students often. And they don't drive. They don't smoke. They don't do any of they don't even go to the mall by themselves anymore. So they don't do any of the things that sort of maybe foolish, but help you grow up a little bit and test your limits. So when they come to their parents with one of these identities, and this is the other thing, they have much less sex than the previous generation.
Like almost zero.
Almost zero, right. So they don't even kiss. So when a girl comes and says, I think I'm lesbian, the parents who are liberal very, very often embrace it and take it really seriously. But in fact, oftentimes the girl actually has no idea what she is. She's never kissed anybody. And what she was really asking for was the opportunity to be her own person. And anyway, sorry, that wasn't exactly your answer.
No, but that's you're right. But then that's the sort of trendy way now to do it. And what you wrote about, and this was the thing I found so distressing is, as Caitlin says, your daughter comes to you, and this would be most, parental reactions, parents of this kind reaction. Okay, John, if that's what you want to be,
right?
You do that, and then they are then thrust into this, not just the embrace of the influencers, but the school guidance counselors. Everyone leaps aboard that this, and then you can say, okay, well, that's great too, except that it starts taking them down a road. And this was the sort of frightening aspect, especially if you're a parent, that this child who, even, the 30 is the new 20 and 50 is the new 40. Even adults are immature today. You're taking a 12, 13, 14-year-old kid, and suddenly you're the mother. You're going, okay, John, you're in an office. She's getting prescribed testosterone, puberty blockers. Talk about the sort of quick slope to real physical intervention in this, not just psychological, but physical.
Okay, so it starts at the schools. The schools will affirm and keep it from the parents. So if the child decides,
the parents disagree, right?
Right. So even they will get the gender indoctrination very often in the school system. And I looked into California to show exactly what's going on there. And it's a model for the country, really. And so they'll get the gender indoctrination in the school of, look at all the options for you. So the kid picks one and even comes up with a new name and pronouns. And this is all kept from the parents. They will start using an opposite sex bathroom and stay with the boys on the overnight trip and whatnot. And the parents have no idea that the kid's called Jim for a year or whatever. Mm-hmm. But then they are very much encouraged, look, if you're transgender, prove it. That is the next step, right? Mm-hmm. So in order to establish, no, you really are different. You're the real deal. There's a big push to medicalize. And unfortunately, these come with not only very serious physical consequences, but the girls who go through this process do not end up very often any happier because they didn't have genuine gender dysphoria or typical gender dysphoria to begin with. If these girls were just transitioning and they were living productive, happy, healthy lives, I wouldn't have written this book because I don't really care in that case. But the truth is they're not. They're very often just as miserable. They cut off their families. They're permanently infertile, and they are certainly no happier.
Let's roll back because this was the real revelation of your book. Because if it's just, we'll call you Jack, fine. But it's not that. It starts with real medical treatments. And as you point out, you don't have to get these treatments. You don't have to do much more than just say to a therapist or a doctor, I'm a boy. And then they teach you to sort of on this online community, you have to say you felt it all your life. And even if you haven't, and then they start doing the breast binding, which reminded me of Chinese foot binding, the ancient Chinese foot binding, which none of us would think is a great idea. But they start wrapping their chests to hide their breasts and their developing breasts. And then they start getting very serious chemicals, hormones put into their bodies. So testosterone, the puberty blocker, what is it, Lupron? Talk about what those things actually do to you. And we're talking about 13, 14, 15-year-old girls.
So puberty blockers start before puberty. So that shuts down part of the pituitary that stimulates puberty. So those are slightly younger kids that would go on to that. So usually ages 8 to 11. The girls that I really look at are the teenagers, and they very often start with testosterone. And the really insidious thing about testosterone is it sort of, in some ways, it does amazing things to cure normal female adolescence. So it reduces anxiety, it redistributes fat, it sometimes even can control depression, and it gives you a boost of confidence and euphoria. So these
those
girls,
young men are so confident and
right. It gives them that swagger, and they can't wait to tell their friends how great they feel. The problems, of course, is that it can lead to infertility. There's often, doctors will recommend a prophylactic hysterectomy if you've been on it for 5 years because of the risk of endometrial cancer. It gives you body hair and facial hair that never goes away. It alters your features. It deepens your voice in a way that doesn't seem to go away. And it alters your private anatomy in ways that are a little disturbing.
This is just information that is being blocked from the public. And there's an agenda here. And for this book, that not to be allowed to advertise it on Amazon is part of the agenda. And when there's an agenda that says parents should not know the consequences of prescription medications that they may not even have been told their kid is taking, when there's a whole agenda to keep the parent away from this information, then something evil is happening, because your parent is the who will be with you forever. And the notion that, this whole thing, as you said in the book so wisely, that there's this notion that, oh, if your parents don't agree, don't worry, your parents know nothing, your parents are fools, they're hateful people, only we know. And a kid can ride high on that, but your online community, that's not the one who's going to help you in life. Your parents are the ones who care about you and know you. And I found that desperately sad, and it made me hugely angry.
Well, you pointed out when you referred earlier to California, you wrote it that the June 2019 California Teachers Association voted to allow 12-year-old girls and up to seek hormone treatment without parents' permission. So these potentially, I've look at the controversy that surrounds a menopausal hormone replacement therapy, all the possible effects, the higher rates of cancer. These are not things that you play with, and let alone puberty blockers that stop natural development. There's, as you point out, there hasn't been enough time to research the long-term effects of what happens when you do that to your body. We
That's
know,
right,
for example, that when you don't breastfeed, if you can, it's the best thing you can do for your baby. But it's also a very good thing for you, because women who breastfeed have lower incidence of breast and ovarian cancer. So we don't even know the health repercussions. But I think the thing that I just I couldn't stop reading. I was reading it and I noticed that I had chewed all the nails down on my left hand, was the double mastectomies, called, what do you call it? Something very benign, like top surgery.
Top surgery, yeah.
Some of these girls are seeking at 16. They're having their breath. Talk about that.
Right. So one of the disturbing things is activists have been able to persuade medical professional organizations to change their standards with regard to this area of medicine specifically, so that it's the only area of medicine I know of where the doctors are relying on the patient's self-diagnosis. So a girl will come in and say, I'm gender dysphoric. I've always been that way. And based on her self-assessment, a medical clinic, sometimes not even a doctor, it may just be Planned Parenthood, makes her sign, a waiver of the risks. She, on an informed consent basis, it's called, and she gets the testosterone that day. And it's the same thing with top surgery. She doesn't even need a therapist note saying that she really does have gender dysphoria. And sort of the proof, in some sense, the proof of how out of control this has gotten is that so-called non-binary girls show up asking for double mastectomies and get them. So non-binary is someone who insists they're neither gender. Well, if you said that the rationale was gender dysphoria and it was to achieve, I'm really transgender, I'm only comfortable as a boy, maybe you could understand that rationale, but doctors are removing healthy breasts for a girl who wants to look more like a neither male nor female.
My sense before reading it, and I'm still a bit confused, is that there were a lot of girls on the hormones, but that this surgery in the high school phase was rare. But so how many girls are getting this kind of surgery?
Oh, it's a good question. I don't know the numbers of surgery. I know that it I think quadrupled between 2016 and 2017 for biological females. So we know that these surgeries have gotten massively popular. The hormones is usually where they start, and the age of medical consent varies by state. In Oregon, it's 15, but in most states, you have to wait till you're 18 to get the cross-sex hormones. Unless parents consent. So these girls are starting testosterone sort of as soon as they get 18, and they spend the years before that dreaming and obsessing over testosterone.
I wanted to talk, just read one quick paragraph about, I really think there's something evil in these activists who are going into schools and getting, we're both in California. The California public schools are always in the lead of things like this. That it is already the case that you can opt out of sex ed if you don't want your kid, for whatever reasons, religious beliefs, or you just think those are things that should be taught at home, you can opt out. But you cannot opt out from this 13-year gender indoctrination, which starts with the kindergarten teacher telling you that your gender is a guess that your parents made the day you were born. That's an evil thing to say. And imagine being in a kindergarten and saying, oh, Mom always told me I was a boy, but she just guessed that because I had a penis. So I'm confused now.
There's something very insidious going on, because so the parents there was a massive protest of this when they found out, what was in some of the gender curriculum, and the California came out with its new framework. It's called the Framework for its Educational System. And parents got very upset about that very thing. There was a book in it that I think was called Who Am I? I don't know. I quote it in the book, and it and they demanded it be taken out. And so that particular book was taken out for kindergartners, and then they supplied it to teachers via the virtual libraries. So it's still a resource provided to the teachers by the public schools, even though they officially took it out of the curriculum. This is the kind of games that they play with parents, and they're very good at it.
Abigail, Caitlin, let's pause right there for a moment just to go to an ad. These days, almost everyone is relying on shipping, for everything. For e-commerce businesses, shipping in 2 days or less is the new standard. As a growing business, how can you keep up? Well, introducing Shippo, your business's new secret weapon. Shippo is the only shipping software for growing businesses that you can start today, set up in minutes, and then ship today. Because they ship hundreds of millions of packages, Shippo's volume discounts save you up to 90% off carrier rates. Simply connect your online store to Shippo. No coding or technical expertise required. They will instantly identify the lowest shipping rates from 55 plus top global carriers like UPS, USPS, FedEx, and DHL. And your orders are automatically pulled in and ready to go. Just click, print, and ship. Plus, your automated return labels are free. You only pay if your customers use them. Companies that use Shippo save thousands of dollars, free up hours of valuable time, and on average grow 77% year over year. Join over 100,000 companies who are saving up to 99% off carrier rates with Shippo. For our listeners, they're offering their best discount available anywhere. Get a shipping consultation and a Shippo Pro Plan 6 months trial for free at goshippo.com/femsplain. That's up to a $700 value for free at goshippo.com/femsplain. Well, again, I want to go back to the disclaimer because I remember, in the 90s, there were big conversations about Heather has two mommies, and they're already promoting gay marriage at at the kindergarten level. And, and I don't think you're saying that. And I want to clarify, I don't think this is the same thing. That, first of all, bringing sexuality to kindergartners, I think is just silly either way. Like, why do they need to start thinking about any of this? But that what this leads to in terms of self-harm eventually, and what is it in the and Caitlin, you've written so eloquently about girlhood. What is it? I mean, it seizes this certain demographic of girls in their teenagehood. I mean, a lot of kids who get that same talk in kindergarten are not going to go on to do this, but it does seem to seize the same girls who might have been cutting, the same girls who might have been bulimic, and yet this seems so harmful. Why do these girls feel this hatred or dislike or feel so detached from their bodies that they feel they have to go this far?
Should I chip in? Okay.
Yep.
If I were introduced to sexuality at probably age 10 and 12 and 14 through internet porn, which is, you might be doing everything in your house to make sure that doesn't happen. The second they're at a play date, big brother knows how to do. The big brother in the household has taught the younger. And so they are seeing the average American 12-year-old has seen more extremely hardcore pornography than the entire fighting forces of the Second World War. I mean, this didn't exist. It's extreme that a kid can plug up a very extreme niche kind of kink, which, more power to people with kinks. But that a kid will be seeing that, I think as a girl, I would have turned away from sex. And
that's right.
Very afraid of sex.
That's right. They find it terrifying. Yeah.
It is. Sometimes I watch it and I just think, this is terrifying to a girl. And the ones who, you can find the ones where the women are empowered or they're, the dominatrix. But in most of them, women are just really being treated like objects, and very harshly and very roughly. And so back to what you're saying, Danielle, girlhood, it's always been this delicate, difficult passage, always. And in the 90s, we were all dealing with it from the perspective of some very flawed research by Carol Gilligan, which ended up being
oh my God, I remember
reviving
that.
Ophelia. But that really that had some truth to it, which was that girls were being forced too quickly into sexuality, was her main thesis, let alone the kind of world they lived in. And that she didn't think a 12-year-old, this book was written 25 years ago, 12-year-olds, the most they should be doing is holding hands, she said. And she's super progressive, who wrote this. What's her name? Mary Pfeiffer. So she's sensible. And since she's written that, we have had all this pornography, number one. Number two, we've had a brand of feminism that was meant to empower. That was the original thought, but really made it ultimately like, God, it is horrible to be born female. There's all this date rape. You're constantly going to be sexually harassed at work. You're going to, you can never, in college, the minute you get there, you'll have your first rape and you'll be raped until the day you leave. It is like, get me out of this identity as quickly as possible because it's a dangerous identity. is any of that kind of adding into what you're finding? Either the porn?
Absolutely. That's all part of it. I mean, they get so many messages that it's terrible to be a girl, that it's terrible to be a woman. You're just a victim. And at the same time, in addition, you mentioned the violent porn, that's a big part of it. But part of it is just seeing beautiful women torn apart on social media. I mean, I was interviewing one adolescent who had gone through this, and a young woman, she's no longer an adolescent, but I trans-identified and was on hormones and whatnot. And I said to her, she said, well, there aren't any positive female role models. And I said to her, what are you talking about? I just saw, help me understand this. I just saw A Star Is Born with Lady Gaga. She's not perfect looking and she's a heck of a role model and whatnot. And she said to me, don't you know how they talk about her online?
Oh my God.
I realized what I thought was a very positive and not perfectly perfect looking role model for women. They saw her online because that's where they exist, and to them, women like that get torn apart, and so that means, of course, they get torn apart.
Who is their ideal? Who did you discover was the sort of person that these young women are admiring?
That's interesting. I don't know that they had a woman that they were admiring, because all of their, if you look at the Kardashians or whatnot, they feel that every perfect looking woman is someone they can never, equal. And of course they can't, because it would take all kinds of surgery and airbrushing and whatever to achieve that. And also they're in the middle of adolescence, the most awkward time.
That's the historical part of it. And this is that great, discomfort and that when your body takes over and yet you feel emotionally not ready and physically not ready to have sexual relations, that you start. And I think, Caitlin, historically women sort of want to hide. I mean, unless you're being married off in a culture that marries you off at 14, and you did the analogy to Sleeping Beauty and Snow White, that these maybe were fairy tales about cutting out for a few years. If only I could go to sleep and wake up as an 18-year-old and, oh, there's my handsome prince, all good. I didn't have to go through what is increasingly becoming a very confusing and difficult, especially, as you say, with the constant pelting of online images. Not that there weren't images all through the ages, including, in cinema and magazines.
Just to go back to what you said before, it's very different from being gay. I mean, I want to emphasize how different this is from an announcement of being gay. A child who comes to their parent, or a teenager, and says, I'm gay, is asking the parent to accept them for what they are. A child that comes to them, a teenager that says, I think I'm a boy, is asking the parent to accept them for what they are not. And the psychological...
Or are certainly not certain about at that point. Yeah.
Well, certainly
or
not
physically
certain
are not. Right. Biologically, you are not.
Right.
Right.
So what they have to go through in order to even present in a convincing way is extremely risky. It is, not at all certain to cure their whatever distress they're going through. And it may not even be real gender dysphoria that they're suffering from. So, the outcomes for these girls are not great.
I need you to tell us, because this is just so terrifying. This is where I really lost all my fingernails, where you actually you described what happens. And this is obviously not everyone is doing this, but when you decide to go the full, I want to call it the full Monty, but I don't think that's right. You've had your double mastectomy. Now you want a penis, not happiness, a penis. What, well, that too, I guess. Tell us about the surgery, because it's being done. It's an incredibly, forget about the emotional side, complicated medically, and is being done by people who aren't necessarily, just describe what you have to do. And the forearm part just, oh my
right. God. So, I interviewed a lot of transgender adults for the book, and, one of the things I care about and they care about is transgender health. And unfortunately, this has so captivated the medical profession, and these are such big money makers that they often don't have the best doctors working on it. So I talked to one extremely highly trained microsurgeon at a very top hospital in the country, and he's a plastic surgeon and has microsurgery fellowships and whatnot. And he will not do the bottom surgery, which is creating the neophallus from desleeving the forearm and transferring arteries and veins and whatnot. And he won't do it because he says, I became a doctor to cure people, not to do that. He doesn't feel comfortable doing it. But what bothers him so much is because he won't do the surgery, it is this highly experimental surgery is performed by people he considers completely unqualified because the hospitals make so much money from them. It requires, a neophallus requires several surgeries in order to get it to stiffen.
I mean, the forearm thing was crazy. Yeah. I didn't know.
So they desleeve the forearm. They take basically a roll of skin and fat and nerve and artery. They have to transplant it to, the crotch area. And the difficult thing is they have to get a urine stream through, and they have to get it to stream, not spray, which is very difficult. It really is very susceptible to blood clotting. So the sutures you need are apparently like a quarter of the size of a human hair. This is a very, very difficult microsurgery under the best of circumstances. And then, of course, there's another surgery you need in order to get it to stiffen, and in order to get it to stiffen enough to penetrate is even more difficult. Now, fortunately, most girls at this point are not seeking phalloplasty, and part of the reason they're not is because they're not really trying to be men at all. They just want to stop being girls during a time in adolescence when nobody wants to be a girl.
Yeah, it fits in what you were talking about, Danielle, that kind of ancient, carving of skin. Always it's more prevalent in girls. It's a mortification of the flesh, trying to cut the flesh, damage the flesh, get out of the flesh, and you can't do it. Of course, you're still there. But I just want to add into this conversation, just my own point of view, but obviously, if a kid comes to parent and says, I'm gay, first place, I always tell parents, that's a high compliment to you in your relationship, that your child feels safe enough to tell you that. And what you need to do is you don't make a huge deal out of it. They just want to know, am I the same person to you that I was before? And you go, oh, okay, glad you told me that. And you keep on making dinner. And they're like, oh, my mom is still my mom. This hasn't changed my relationship. And so I think because we all know that so well, we assume, well, if a teen daughter comes in and says, I'm a boy, we're supposed to go, oh, that's good. Okay. And then she starts in her teenage girl way because they're so relentless on anything. They're relentless about getting a new pair of earrings. They just won't let it go. And it comes up over and over. And the parent thinks, well, good parenting of a gay child is, of course, to accept. Mm-hmm. But is good parenting to a kid who comes forward with no previous sign at all of gender dysphoria, is it good parenting to just say, that's interesting? Or should you say, why do you think that? Or should you say, no, you're not. You're actually a girl. Let's look at some pictures. Like, what is the right response of a loving parent?
It's a good question. It is really different. So there are kids who have gender dysphoria, and there are even girls who will want to become a transgender adult. These people exist. I would never deny that. Okay. But when a girl, the questions to sort of wonder about was this girl, did she have gender dysphoria as a small child? And you would know. It's a severe, consistent, insistent discomfort in a biological sex. It's very severe. Okay. So did she have that? Has she been, subject to all these internet influences? Is this the influence of her peers? Does her peer group have a lot of kids who are suddenly identifying as transgender? And has she been subject to this gender ideology in her school? And those are things that never affected transgender adults, right? Nobody I know who I interviewed as a transgender adult, none of them did it because of YouTube. But these girls will often say, I discovered I was trans because of you. They will tell you that. So I definitely think that I've talked to a lot of psychologists about this, and the ones that I have sort of the most trust in and respect for will say to me, you don't have to agree with their self-assessment, and you don't have to go along with it. Okay, just because she says she has gender dysphoria and she's a boy now, and please call me Tim or whatever, you don't have to go along with it. You can support her and be loving without buying into something that you don't think is right for her, and you don't even think is authentic.
Well, I think Caitlin's really right, though, because your impulse, and this is where when you got into like the hormone blockers, that your impulse as a parent, and certainly this would be my first impulse, is say, okay, this will pass, or it won't, it'll get more serious. But I have no idea about what is out there in terms of the next step. And I think what was so poignant about your book is the parents you were just so accepting of it, and you want them to be happy. And again, it's a very affluent problem because suddenly you're going to therapists and hormone clinics and things. But you don't understand that the next phase, and as your child obsessively gets into it amongst these YouTubers and online, that the next thing she is going to want to do is have these puberty blockers, and that's serious. And the next thing she's going to want to have is testosterone. And if it keeps up, you get down the road to the double mastectomy. But you quoted Dr. Blanchard from my hometown of Toronto, CAMH as we know it, who was head of the gender dysphoria unit. I mean, this is a very, very serious facility. It's a preeminent mental health facility. He was there for years, and he got fired. Tell us what happened.
So I talked to both Ray Blanchard and Ken Zucker.
Right.
Ken Zucker was the one fired. Ray ended up retiring. Both brilliant men. And Zucker, who was fired, actually chaired the committee that wrote the entry for the DSM on gender dysphoria. And he was fired for allegedly having violated the conversion therapy laws, which we have in America, in many states as well, which say that a mental health professional cannot perform conversion therapy on the basis of sexual orientation. And that's, a good thing. Obviously, conversion therapy was often very grisly and involved all kinds of, terrible practices. But they inserted gender identity laws language into these laws so that you couldn't help a child anymore get comfortable in their biological sex. Well, that's literally the treatment that had existed for decades. And that's what Ken Zucker had pioneered. And it wasn't converting the child, it was helping them get more comfortable. And very often what Dr. Zucker found was the problem, even though the child had latched on to gender, the problem that was causing the distress often had nothing to do with gender at all. So in many cases, a child would dress as a girl to get his mother's love and attention, but not necessarily because, he was sort of irrevocably gender dysphoric.
That is so interesting. And it's just taking me back to my teaching days where, parents would come in and say, I'm really worried about my daughter or son. They're tanking their classes. They used to be a good student and they're not doing well. And I don't know if she's got a learning disability or whatever. And you kind of have to quietly say, well, what's going on at home? There's a monstrous divorce that's going on and this kid is barely clinging on. You sometimes have to talk to the parents. A lot of times the behaviors that most disturbed parents have nothing to do with the behavior. It has to do with some deeper-ish psychological issue. And if you don't get to that, they're going to keep focusing on the behavior. And I just think it's cowardice that's led these doctors to do this, because a huge number of them, of pediatricians, huge number of them think this is wrong, this wholesale, affirmative care for these kids. But they are frightened of being canceled within the medical community. Well, it's just a very tiny, real well, that's what I want to ask you. What about your parent, your daughter? You knew from the get-go that maybe she's a lesbian, maybe she's trans, but from the beginning, she has a gender identity and it's not female, and she comes to you and says she's a boy. Now what do you think is the best practice for the parent?
So I think that's a very different situation. So if a child, you've seen this kid, you know that she has severe discomfort. By the way, that's not the same as being a young lesbian, okay? So girls, very often women who are lesbian and describe their girlhood, they describe like, tremendous discomfort with feminine type things. That's not gender dysphoria necessarily. That's not a persistent and severe discomfort in their sex. That's just a more tomboyish presentation. And we used to allow that, right? We used to say girlhood and womanhood was this, giant room that allowed for all kinds of expression. And today we say, oh, you must really be a boy. So
right, a tomboy was a way to do this without, while remaining a girl.
That's right. A lot of the lesbians I talk to think that this is basically a euthanizing of young lesbians, and with good reason. Many of these girls would end up as lesbians probably if they were just sort of left alone to experience womanhood and sexuality in whatever way it evolved.
Didn't you have that? Didn't you find that if most were not left alone in the sense that you didn't do anything about it, but that if they didn't start doing the hormone blockers and things, that 70% or something you had that would just either just nothing would happen to them and then a certain percentage would be gay. Is that, can you?
Right. So gender dysphoria, so it's been around for a long time. And one of the things we know about it at this point was that most kids have outgrown it. So even little boys who are terribly uncomfortable being boys, most of them will just emerge as gay men. There's no intervention required for them. They're fine. They go on to live healthy lives as gay men. Today, because of sort of the politics and activism behind it and the new approach, which is to immediately agree with the child's self-diagnosis and get them on hormones immediately. And doctors are willing to go along with this. And it really, takes a problem that, in many cases would have just dissipated over time, and it solidifies it.
Before you go, because I realize we're running out of time, I just wanted to go back to one thing about Dr. Blanchard, who said that psychiatric patients should not be their own doctors. And this idea that a patient comes and tells you, I am, a trans, and his method was to explore. And he would often find out, well, as you said, no, well, maybe you're trans, but you also have had a very difficult relationship with your mother. Let's explore that. And often the other issues would go away. But this is also feeding into a little bit of the politics of misogyny. You talked about the erasure of lesbians. We've talked about why is it so bad to be a girl. You noted in the book that we don't allow anyone to appropriate except when it comes to sex. What is this saying about femininity and womanhood today?
Well, there's something very disturbing because, just today somebody wrote to me and said, I'd love to have you on my podcast, but I can't. This is too controversial. And the disturbing thing about that to me is that the activists driving this shutting down of this conversation, many of them are biological men. Some of them are genuinely, gender dysphoric and transgender. This should have nothing to do with them. And also they should have nothing to say about whether girls in distress get the treatment they need and that we're all allowed to have an open discussion about that. It really has nothing to do with them. But activists who are the most crazy member of any group, I mean, the transgender adults I've talked to are very lovely and sober people. They are not the activists. The activists who are shutting down this conversation are shutting down the conversation that really has nothing to do with them. And they really are sort of way over their skis on this.
Now, the most controversial aspect, and I know Katie Herzog got fired or permanently canceled for this, is the notion of regrets. If anybody has regrets about transitioning, and this is not talking about adults, but I'm talking about the girls. If they decide this wasn't right for them, did you study regret? Did they have regret?
Yeah, so I talked to a lot of girls who have regret. Unfortunately, because gender dysphoria very often wasn't their actual problem, they found that medical transition didn't solve their distress. And so we're seeing very high numbers of regret among this population specifically. You know, we don't, the studies are just being done now because it's a new phenomenon, but I can tell you that the big, Reddit, there's a famous sort of well-known subreddit among detransitioners where they talk about their experiences. And I think 6 months ago it had 7,000 members, and now it's up to 13,000. We know that this population is fast growing of people who really wish the doctors hadn't encouraged them and their therapists hadn't encouraged them to make these changes they can't take back.
It's like, if you imagine having a double mastectomy at 16. I mean, that's the thing that if I was a parent, I just want to say, look, it's like with my kids and tattoos, just get through this. If you at 25, where your brain has finished forming, still want a tattoo, okay. But this is so much more drastic.
That's right. A tattoo would be, most of these parents would
like,
love
give
it.
me a tattoo.
So Abigail, what's the strongest argument on the other side for affirmative care? What's the strongest argument that you found for, wonderful, you're John, and we'll go see the therapist?
It's hard because I guess the strongest argument would be, of course, you want a child to feel comfortable and supported. I mean, that's something all parents want. I think that especially, these kids are in pain, they're in distress. Yeah. And unfortunately, the last thing a parent wants to do is add to their daughter's pain. So they're willing to do just about anything if it pleases her. Unfortunately, in some cases, affirmation may please her, but it might not be good for her. Right. So there are cases in which you want to say, honey, and the problem is when you're fixating on something, right? You're just think, oh, if I just lost these 5 pounds, if I just got liposuction, I know my life would be better if I just had that nose job or whatever it is. And the problem is we're always convinced when we're teenagers that the thing that we've decided is causing our distress is going to be the cure-all. And that's why we don't usually in other instances, we don't let teenagers decide what life-altering decisions they want to make.
One of in the fairy tale vein, I was thinking all through this, especially with the surgeries, of the real Little Mermaid tale by Hans Christian Andersen. And unlike the Disney one, the mermaid doesn't just lose her voice. No. She gets feet at the cost of every step being like knives. Right. And of course it's a very tragic ending, but I feel like that as you say, they start to almost fetishize or obsess over losing their breasts or, taking these hormones and getting facial hair without understanding the deal that you are making, that these are not going to, it's your body. These are things, and in these cases cannot be undone. You said that actually the most successful parents just pulled their kids out of these environments. One went to a horse farm. Another family just moved to the rural, to get them out of this peer group.
Right, because all the experiences of girlhood that we remember, sitting in a girl's room for hours or at the mall and talking or writing in your diary and working through these experiences or giving your friends a hug, they don't do it anywhere near as often, okay? Mm-hmm. So they just sit on the internet steeping in this transgender sort of this feedback loop of gender ideology, and it doesn't fill them up. So the next question is always, what am I going to do next?
Yeah.
Well, I would really challenge, I don't even want to say it in a confrontational way. I would encourage or invite podcast hosts, people who look into issues like this, who write about books, to turn to your book and have you on and have a conversation. And the host
or even
may not
a debate.
be convinced, even a debate. Yeah. But even just, to say, I really disagreed with this. What were you thinking here? That's how we get, the way we as a civil society advance is that one person has one idea, the other has the other. We throw them all on the table and we work to figure it out as best we can. And to say that, this is a topic that's very much protecting girls' physical health. We won't advertise on Amazon. I mean, Jeff Bezos has a lot to answer for in terms of suppressing speech.
Yeah.
No wonder he wants to have a monopoly. He wants to suppress speech. It's all in a continuum.
It's funny because some people say to me, well, so what? So they're still selling your book. So what that they don't sponsor an ad? And my response is, well, what about when they decide to stop selling the book at all?
That's next.
I mean, it could be, right? There are no books.
Not for your book, but, a year down the line, the next book, this is blocking freedom of expression. It's blocking scientific inquiry. It's blocking parents getting the full picture before they make decisions. It's an agenda, and it's not your kid's best interest that the agenda has at heart.
And I think you so shrewdly pointed out, Abigail, that imagine if the whole school curriculum was trying to persuade your children not to have vaccines. And, we know there are a lot of anti-vaxxers out there. And, and then you as a parent find out that your child is being, brainwashed not to have vaccines. It's a similar type of harm that is coming to these kids by taking these hormones, often without their parents' knowledge. But we would all, most people would get behind not having that kind of curriculum. So it just has such repercussions that go beyond just mere acceptance and, encouragement and being a loving parent to your child. It's an important book that you've written, and I agree with
really
Caitlin.
Important.
I hope
really
Thank you.
Probably the most important book of the year. Nobody has written this book. Yeah. No one has researched it. No one has had the courage. Your courage is to be commended. The courage to come forward, knowing it would be hard, knowing that you would be identified as somebody who's transphobic, knowing all of this, you performed an act of service to parents and to girls that they are desperately needed. And I think this book is going to do a lot of good.
So it's going to help a lot of parents and girls. So Abigail, the book is Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze, Seducing Our Daughters. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was terrific to talk to you. Thank you.
With so many of us working from home, self-isolating, getting fresh food can be an ordeal. And I'm getting really over cooking, not just in the evenings, but all the time, just because I want to stay healthy, focused, and energized. So why not get fresh, delicious meals delivered straight to your door from Sakara? Sakara is a nutrition company that believes wellness begins with what you eat. Their signature nutrition program brings the transformational power of plant nutrition to your home in the form of fresh, plant-rich, ready-to-eat meals. Made with organic ingredients and powerful superfoods, each meal is expertly designed to boost immunity, improve energy, support gut health and digestion, and get your skin glowing. In addition to their delicious meals, Sakara also offers daily essentials like supplements and herbal teas to complete your wellness routine and support overall health and vitality. To boost immunity, try their best-selling daily probiotic blend or detox water drops with pure chlorophyll. And right now, Sakara is offering our listeners 20% off their order when they go to sakara.com/femsplain or enter code FEMSPLAIN at checkout. That's Sakara, sakara.com/femsplain. Get 20% off your order. Sakara.com/femsplain. Wow, so that was quite an interview. What was your reaction, Caitlin? Was it as you expected? Was it?
Well, it's even I, who tried to be very open to all kinds of arguments and who loved the book, the whole time through I was like, this is going to be a clip that's going to run forever on YouTube and nobody's going to hear the rest of what I was saying. We've come to a point in our culture that we can't talk about this. We can only say one philosophical response about it. And I don't think that's responsible to the girls who are in the middle of this. And there's got to be a way to preserve and understand which girls would truly be candidates for this kind of intervention versus the many who truly need mental health services, as she was saying, who often are just depressed, as teen girls often are. They seek an answer, and anyone who's suffered from depression, I have in the past, if you get an idea that one unified field theory solution will lift you from that, it's very tempting.
And I think,
it's hard for parents.
I also think if you're a parent who is going through this or knows someone who is, it's so important to read this book early to be able to decipher exactly what you said. Is this one of the 0.000% who maybe really does have gender dysmorphia and maybe has exhibited that from an earlier age, or not? And how do you navigate this?
Is it a higher percentage?
It might be. I kind of made that up. I just pulled that one out.
Pull that out, yeah.
Whatever the small percentage is, but not certainly the sudden 4,000.
It's like the Dalai Lama, that's that rare.
But the parents need to read this early because, as she said, all those generous impulses and that you have and the belief in your child, I want to do best by her, can be actually misdirected. And in the end, it seems the only thing or the most effective thing you can do is just pull your kid out of wherever she is. In some cases, the parents drove to the other side of the country. They changed schools. They just, because it was, as she's called it, the contagion of the peer group, where that was, and you see it in the research in these clusters of girls that one does it and then suddenly it's like a COVID outbreak, then suddenly 6 of them are doing it and they're all in these same little groups. So anyway, it was fascinating and I wish her very well. I'm sure it's going to be a very big book, but I hope it's a big book in the right way and not a big book because everybody gets angry about it or because it's so politicized. And
that we, both of us, very strongly support trans kids and their journey. And we just are really supporting an idea where we're not medicalizing at a very young age unless certain benchmarks have been met, including the sense that from the earliest childhood, the kid just wasn't interested in the gender conforming, toys or shows or whatever. That would be a hint that this is a lifelong feeling. But again, as she said, it might just be a lifelong feeling that you're a lesbian, which is now the most uncool thing I guess you can be other than the two of us.
Yeah.
Cisgendered married ladies.
We're the worst. We're almost Karens, I think, middle-aged, cisgendered, white.
I don't think it's for us to determine that. I think that Karenhood is determined from the outside, but I'm sure we'll get to be Karen by the end.
I'm sure we'll get it. All right. Now, going to some of our fun listener reaction. Okay, we're catching up, so I'll read a couple that we got. This one goes back to the Mrs. America episode. You were on this, Caitlin, with me about Phyllis Schlaf, played by Phyllis.
Cate Blanchett, I think.
Yes, thank you, Cate Blanchett. It says, hi, ladies. I really enjoyed the episode about Mrs. America and Phyllis Schlafly, a person I've never been a fan of, but I respected, and it's frustrating how Hollywood has a narrative that refuses to be thwarted by facts. I have to call you out gently, though, on maybe episode 6, when Danielle, I think, commented on a man mowing his lawn wearing a mask. Clearly, she and none of your guests have grass allergies. My husband has a grass allergy, although he has steadfastly refused to wear one. He does wear one in public for COVID reasons, but not for mowing. But anyway, that man may have been trying to avoid pollen or grass particles. Okay, I just want to clarify before we react that it was, I'm going to throw Megan Cox-Gurdon under the bus, who was on that show.
No, don't do it. Don't do it.
It wasn't me. But no, it was an interesting discussion about virtue signaling.
They came for Megan and I said nothing, and then they came for me.
About grass masks. No, it was making, in the point of making virtue signaling about wearing a mask. And she said, she thought it had gotten to the point of ridiculousness when people, she was very for wearing masks and in all the places you're supposed to, but then she'd see someone like a man mowing his lawn and the suburbs and nobody around, and he was wearing a mask, and she thought that was a little over the top. That was the context for that.
Well, I certainly don't think that the people who made the show were unaware or in any way aware of COVID, because all this was made long before, I'm sure, the COVID thing. But, lawns are always, it was interesting to me because when at first you said there was a question about that, I thought, what a particular and odd question. And I thought, lawns are always a hotbed. They are always a hotbed. If you go...
You mean in general as issues?
In general, it's super heightened issue. If you lawn care is considered a really big mark of being a good neighbor. If you're in a certain neighborhood and you let your lawn go to pot or to seed, you're really demonized. And it used to be that middle-class people, upper middle-class people even, had much smaller lawns, or middle class, than they do today, because the people who lived in the house were by and large the people who mowed the lawns. And It's a big task. And so now you go into suburbs all over the country, and it's one of those, as immigrants' rights activists always talk about, it's one of those boutique services that American middle class have gotten very comfortable with, but to the point of exploiting these workers. So I will commend the character who, despite a grass allergy, mowed his own lawn and kept it nice for the sake of the community. Yes.
he's really a hero, is what you're saying. He's a hero.
He's a modern,
a masked hero.
He was a controversial one, but her husband was the last American hero.
Well, I also think because the politics of masks is so insane right now, and people refusing to wear them in certain places as a political statement. If you want a virtue signal by wearing a mask on your dog walk, you go ahead. Thank you. Thank you for showing that, you believe it's sensible to wear a mask, even at times where, you might not be in danger. I go on a dog walk in a ravine every day, and I don't wear a mask, but I'm very conscientious about stepping way to the side when someone passes. And there are people, I don't know, it's about 20% will wear masks, but it's always very polite, and it's always very clear.
About in the States or in Canada?
In the States. In Canada, everybody wears a mask. Canadians are very obedient, law-abiding people. And I stopped at a gas station.
I think they also have a sense of a cohesive community caring for one another through wearing the mask.
Right.
And in America, I just, it's interesting when there's all different reasons for not wearing the mask. People on the left have a reason, and many reasons, and people on the right have any reasons. But for some of those redder states, I think if you, and this is going to sound really flip, but if you don't believe in evolution, you might not believe in a virus's capacity to spread. You might think that it's all beyond the range of human understanding. But those of us who, got a C- in junior biology understand that, if there's a virus around and you avoid the virus, you won't get the virus.
Or it's a religious.
I just don't know why.
You'd hear people, well, if it's God's will, but, maybe you're willing to take the risk of God's will, but what about grandma? Is it God's will that I kill grandma? But no, it's interesting.
But I think if you have,
Oh, sorry.
The ideology oftentimes in a religion is you've helped grandma because she got to go to, she got to be raptured.
She's with Jesus now, right? That's true. Well, the interesting thing about crossing into Canada is, so I had to, I have to quarantine myself. I was allowed to get gas, but they're very strict about not going in and getting a coffee, which let's just say I didn't go in and get a coffee. But I did notice.
Let's just say that.
Let's just say that. But I did notice that the road stops, like the in and out doors, and everybody was distancing, and there were little signs everywhere saying, "We're in this together." And it was such a relief. It was just like, it was uncontroversial, and it was this nation, that sense of rallying together rather than at each other, which is just how I've felt constantly being in Washington, D.C., that everybody is at each other, not with each other or helping each other. So
absolutely.
Anyway.
And when you finally have found like a coterie of people whose ideas you want to sign on to, suddenly one of them becomes so extreme that you realize, oh, those aren't my people either, that everybody, I just feel like the country is not high enough at this point. I live in a legal marijuana state, so I'm able to kind of comprehend and go forward. It's like, and in LA, there's not a man, woman, or child that's on less than 0.5 milligrams of Xanax, but it's like, that's just a start. We all need to bring it down. And I know that's a controversial thing to say, let's all be calmer, because calm, maintains the status quo, but it's really, America is more than I've experienced it. And I lived through the 60s in Berkeley. I think it's more pulling apart from the center, not from the edges this time. So it's,
it's well, I'm on in a place called Loyalist County, so
say no more.
People have fled before. Okay, here's the last reader reaction. Hi, everyone. I'm the director of design at PragerU, and my fiance, Erica, is the managing editor for Evie. That's an online publication. And humble brag, I've been really impressed with some of the articles she's come up with. I thought I'd share this one with you and hope you'll give it a read and tell me what you think. She's especially curious because we're big Femsplainers fans and listen to the podcast weekly. Oh, thank you, you guys. And she and I were having a bit of a debate about who feels more strongly about this issue, men or women. I'll tell you what the issue is in a second. She insists it's women, and I think it's men, although her position seems more logical. That being said, I hope ladies can give it a read and chime in. So the article was called How Women Can't Accept Compliments. And the headline is, Ladies, it's time we learned how to accept a compliment. And she goes on to argue that one of the reasons we can't is because women are always so obsessed with perfection that that when somebody says, hey, I love your hair today, you're like, oh, it doesn't look like Kim Kardashian's at the moment or whatever. So we are famously terrible about taking compliments. What do you think, Caitlin?
First place, I really love the husband that he wrote in this way about his wife, and that he's proud of his wife, and that he's a loving enough husband that he's gotten his wife's work recognized on the Mighty Femsplainers. So I love the husband. Well, his wife is entirely right. For the life of me, if someone had gone to my father, who was an historian and a historical novelist of some renown, if someone said to him, honest to God, if someone said, your book is really incredibly great, he would say, isn't it? He wouldn't even say, thank you. He'd say, isn't it a great book? You are accurate. You are correct. If I get any compliment, if you told me if you said I had a nice dress, I'll turn around and tell you I got it at Marshall's for $12.99. Whatever the compliment is, I always seek to undermine it. And I don't know why. And a friend of mine, when she was in graduate school, a mentor told her, you're terrible at accepting compliments. The only thing you're supposed to do is say, thank you.
Yes.
And I don't know if it's seen as too ambitious, or if it's got to be some older idea about what makes you feminine or not feminine, that you turn away every compliment.
Yeah, well,
I don't know.
I like this one that that she cites, is that we're so convinced that there is a better and more perfect version of ourselves, and so when we get the compliment, we just deflect it, and it is a terrible thing, and as she points out, and it's kind of rude or not nice to the person giving the compliment, especially when it's somebody who loves you, like this her husband obviously does. She said when she rejected the compliment, she said, not only was I rejecting his compliments, but I was also taking something away from him that is so important in relationships, acknowledgement. And I hadn't been acknowledging his efforts to make me feel appreciated. So that's too, it's kind of like, it's in a way, it's saying, you have bad judgment. You think I look nice? Oh, great. and you undermine yourself in his eyes. So it's, I think there is only one way to say it, which is thank you. Or really, thank you so much. Oh, I'm so glad you think so. Oh, and then that's it. Then you shut up.
Or my father's approach, you're absolutely right about that. I do look sensational.
Well, actually, I one of my favorite responses to, there's the non-compliment compliment. You as a writer will get it all the time. My husband David gets it all the time. And I hate to tell you that I heard this years and years ago from Rush Limbaugh of all people, but I thought he had the best answer to this non-compliment compliment, which is someone comes up to you and goes, hey, I love your writing. I don't always agree with it, but
I agree with you.
And it's just like, why do I care about what you say? Like, why do you think you need to tell me, the person you're trying to compliment, that you don't agree with me? Like, I don't need to know that. I don't care. But anyway, so somebody came up to Rush Limbaugh and said that, and he said, I don't always agree with you, but I appreciate that you're writing. And he says, you should work on that.
Exactly.
That's right. Caitlin.
The one thing I just want to give. Wait, hold on. I just want to give a little shout out to Evie as a publication. I don't always agree with them, but what I really like is that this is some content about women that you don't find many other places, but that people really are seeking out. And so if it had been on, say, Jezebel, that women don't know how to handle a compliment, like, we're victims of the goddamn patriarchy, and we need to just badass our way through it. And here's a husband who's noting something in his wife and supporting her around it, and she's sharing that information. And it's just a very different way to have, men and women kind of regard each other with respect, I think, in the way that she's handled it and the way that he is. So he's husband of the year, and she's right, and people should check out Evie. That's
excellent advice. And he's made me aware of Evie, which is great, and it's good. And we'll look forward to reading more and talking to more people who write for Evie. But anyway, that's it. And we've gone on.
And someone who writes for Evie is Faith Moore, and she's a wonderful writer, and
I know Faith.
She writes all over the place.
Yes, she wrote the Cinderella book.
She wrote the Cinderella book.
Okay, we've talked about this. We need to have Faith Moore on. Yes, because she wrote about.
We need to have Faith Moore on.
Which Disney princess are you? Yeah, that is such an important topic. Thank you, Caitlin, for co-splaining. I love having you as always. And we'll see you everyone next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.